Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of The Rundown. I'm Sunny Galt. I'm a messenger with United Network News. We're part of United Network. We're also part of CARE, the Center for Amity and Restoration of Earth. And our mission is to bring you the real news. I know there's a lot of different people talking right now. There's a lot of quote unquote news outlets right now. But don't you feel like they're all just kind of talking in circles and no one's really talking about what's really important? It makes you wonder what's behind the curtain. What's really going on out there? Well, that's what we discuss, and we put out a lot of content throughout the week. We talk about local stories as told through the eyes of our field messengers. We talk about other news stories out there, but we go more in depth and give you some behind the scenes information of what's really going on. We talk about how we're restoring our planet and creating the new Earth. And we talk about what's happening in this crazy battle of good versus evil. And that's done through our Global Intelligence Agency report. And that's at the end of what we're going to be talking about today. So if you tuned in because it was an interesting title, sit tight. There's a lot of stuff we're going to go over. And then we'll have some sound bites at the end for what's going on in the GIA report. If you want more information about who we are and what we do, visit our website at unitednetwork.earth. In this podcast, we review some of those top stories that we discussed during the week, because I know you guys are busy and you also may want to share this with other people. The information we put out originally is behind a paywall. It's for our members because we don't get money for advertising. We either make and sell our own products, which you guys may have heard about in our marketplace, or we rely on subscriptions. So you guys support us in a lot of different ways. We certainly appreciate that. And we realize not everyone can have a membership. Not everyone can afford that or are interested in that. So A, we do this podcast because podcasts are free. At least the ones we produce are. And B, we put all of our content out on social media, specifically YouTube and Rumble, if you can consider those social media sites. We'll tease things on social media, but the full videos go on YouTube and Rumble, and we hope they stay up there. Sometimes we say stuff that YouTube doesn't really like, but you can also catch us there. We do put it out a week after it goes out to our members. So if you can wait a little bit longer, then that's another way you can get access to all of our information. Whenever you're listening to us or you're watching one of our videos, I always encourage you guys to think critically about what's being said. For far too long, we just believed people because they had a platform, and really online videos, social media, we've really decentralized information, but sometimes it can just seem so overwhelming, right? And you're getting bits and pieces here and there, and you're trying to make sense of this. And so many times we go outward seeking information, but really all the information is within us. And if you've never heard that before, that may sound a little weird, but they want us to go out. They want us to seek information because they have everything set up, or, the system's falling apart. But for a long time, they had everything set up. So, you didn't have to go inward because we're going to tell you what to think. Well, we're saying the exact opposite. We're here to give you nuggets and bits of information, but really, the truth of everything is within you. And when you connect again with yourself, your higher self, with the creator of the universe, then amazing things happen. And we're living in a day and age where this is going to be more and more common. It's going to be uncommon to not turn from within. And that's where our beautiful discernment lives, which is the ability to be able to tell fact from fiction. And you basically have a built-in lie detector built within you. So lean on that. And the more you lean on that, the more confident you feel in that little voice telling you whether something's right or wrong, the stronger it's going to be and the stronger you will be. But always, whenever you're confronted with information, think critically, ask questions. If it doesn't make sense, put it to the side. Maybe it will make sense later for you. And then when you get those golden bits of information that ring true, share what you know with other people. So let's get to it. Here's the rundown of stories you may have missed this week on UNN. Let's kick things off with our field messenger reports. So in each of our news updates, when we release them, there's usually between 3 and 4 reports from our field messengers. And these are everyday people just like you who are sharing what's going on in their community. Because we believe the best way to break down stereotypes and these narratives that we've been fed for so long is to go straight to the people. If they say something's happening in someone's area, well, let's go talk to the people in that area and see what's really going on. You are so much more powerful than you believe, than many of us believe we are. And we need to start leaning on that. So let's talk about some of the stories that came out. So we'll start with Monday. All right, Emma from Spain tells us a story about what's going on in Fuerteventura. That's where she's at. She says there's a large metal heart sculpture. I love this story. That serves as a collection point for plastic corks. So you guys know what I'm talking about. We see them a lot on wine bottles now. They used to be wooden corks, and now they've turned to plastic corks. But I'm sure they're in various types of bottles. You can find them. So picture this beautiful heart sculpture. And inside of it, you can actually, there's like a little opening on the side, and you can put these corks in there. And what they do with that is they turn it into money, basically, and it goes to support children with disabilities. It's just a beautiful story of how there's just a little bit of space that this takes up. People in the community are using their energy to come together of something that they don't need. You know, most people aren't just collecting plastic corks for no reason, and this can go for a good cause. And it's kind of, in the city area, so people walking by can see it, and just a really nice thing. And so Emma participates in this, and she shows us what she does. Amy out of New Jersey talks with someone in the tombstone industry. And now Amy has done another story that was kind of similar. And in this, she talks more about what the industry was going through during COVID. And the person that she talks to has a small business, where he makes tombstones for various. And it's not just tombstones. I think the other story she did focused on other sculptures and monuments and things like that around the city. But this one focuses more on tombstones. Not something you think about on a day-to-day basis, right? But during COVID, the owner of this place said that the death rate tripled. And it was quite challenging because granite deliveries were halted because of the quarantines. And he was also talking about, this was interesting, how cremation is up. It's up to about 65%. So of the people, at least in his area, the people being cremated are now at 65% compared to, 35% being buried. Very interesting, isn't it? All right, Diane from Uganda takes us to the place where she gets milk, and she is not going to a grocery store, you guys. She is at this nice little small farm, and they're basically just keeping the tradition alive. They have 4 cows. They produce fresh milk twice a day and supply it to the locals. And she says, you're not even really guaranteed the milk. It's first come, first serve. But if you show up and they're gone, they're out of milk for the day, then you basically get first dibs for the next day. And it's just a beautiful story of the community coming together for something as simple as milk. And she says it's really good milk and reminds her of her childhood. All right, Monica from Romania takes us to the Turda salt mine, of course, in Romania, and it is a hidden gem. It features this whole underground world. This salt mine is huge, you guys. Huge. She has this video, and you can look down. It's like you're looking really far down, and the people down there look really small, but it's incredible. It's like this huge, feels like this huge, she says underground, but for me, it kind of felt like a cave, maybe a cave that's underground as well. They have a theater, like a play kind of theater with a stage. They have this whole play area for kids. There's a spa in there, and there's water all around this salted area, this main area she was showing us, where people can get in boats and just paddle around. When I think of salt mines, I think of maybe, I don't know, must be areas in the U.S. that I visited that, don't look like this. They're much smaller. But she said that this place can supply the world's salt for up to 100 years. Crazy. You really have to see it to believe it. All right, Sophia out of Germany takes us to Hamburg, Germany, which is home to the world's largest warehouse district. And you guys, these buildings are so beautiful. When I think of warehouse districts, I think of places in the U.S. that have a lot of industrial activity, at least they did at one point. For example, I grew up in Ohio, and in northeastern Ohio, we had all the rubber companies. We had Goodyear and Firestone, and I'm sure many places that I'm forgetting, many other businesses that I'm forgetting right now. But the point is, the buildings now are so run down. Like after the companies left, it kind of turned into this gross area that really just needs to be demolished because the windows are broken. It's kind of gross. So that's what I think of when I think of warehouse districts. But this is beautiful. They have these amazing Gothic revival architecture and the history that's connected to it. And there's so much global trade coming from this area. And it's really turned into this vibrant cultural hub. In fact, she says that coffee was really big in the area. So now you have these beautiful little coffee shops that you can stop by. And it's just a really nice, different way to look at a warehouse district. All right, Veronica from New Mexico, which is a state in the U.S., takes us to the 52nd annual Balloon Fiesta. And it's international, you guys. Lots of balloons. They actually turn this into a 10-day event. More than 500 air balloons fill the sky. It's considered the largest ballooning event in the world. And I think she also said the most photographed, because you can imagine these brightly colored balloons going up in the sky. And they also have events at night, so they're all glowing. She says this started with just 13 balloons. And now it takes 2 hours for all 500 balloons to launch, and you really just got to see it to believe it. All right, Ags from Denmark takes us to the Martinez Center in Denmark. It is a beautiful, tranquil seaside retreat that blends relaxation with intellectual exploration. So it's named after a guy, Martinez, who had this incredible spiritual awakening, an experience he had around the age of 30. And he started writing all of this down. He's like, I got to tell people about this, right? So this is all about God, creator of the universe, and the importance of love. And for me personally, I mean, I've never read anything that this person has read, but just watching this story, I was like, oh, I feel something there. So I can imagine if you had time dedicated to just go there, relax, take in these teachings, see what resonates with you, it could just be a beautiful experience. And I'm really glad that Ags got to be part of that. All right, Erin from Italy talks about a town in Italy that offered refugees a fresh start. So this goes a little bit further back in history, but it's because of their mayor. Their mayor had a completely different approach because this area is right on the water. So they would have people come in on these ships. And instead of really listening to what other governments were doing, you know, there's obviously a lot of controversy around refugees. This mayor took the time to provide these refugees with homes, help them out with jobs. And it was really a whole community coming together to do this. And what was really interesting is you would think with all the push, you know, to have refugees in certain cities, you would think that this would be something other governments would applaud. And the exact opposite happened. It's like if it wasn't causing turmoil and frustration and people fighting, you know, then it wasn't part of the plan. So they tried to arrest him, I believe, do all this crazy things. But what's beautiful now is you have this multicultural experience when you go to these places. And it's not that the refugees are trying to, you know, take over or do anything like that, but they were able, it looks like, to maintain their heritage, but also adapt to this new community they're in. And it's just a beautiful example of what can happen. Now, keep in mind, this is a very small town, and obviously there's a lot of politics when you look at, you know, refugees on a national level. But this just reminds us that this really is about helping people. At least it should be. True refugee people need help. It should be about us coming together to support that. And this is just one example of someone who thought outside the box, didn't listen to the narrative out there, and just tried to help another human being. And our final story comes out of Africa, in Cameroon, in Africa. And this is from Mohammed. And he talks about how the Chinese have come in this tiny little village, Douala, I believe is how you pronounce it, in Cameroon. And they have invested, but that's kind of a tricky word. They have built things there, these large industrial, large buildings, things like that for commerce and to make things, factories, so to speak. But according to Mohammed, this is really a land grab and it's based on corruption. Surprise, surprise, right? So he says communities are losing their ancestral lands to these deals. And he shows us how you have these like big buildings, big factories, and then not too far away, you have these villages which are not benefiting at all. You can tell just because the buildings are basically falling apart. These people don't have a lot. So they're obviously not benefiting from the factories that are being built. And for me, I look at that and I'm like, yeah, that's a problem, right? So that's something we need to fix. That is corrupt. And so thank you, Mohammed, for bringing this story to light. Now, here are some of the more in-depth stories that the team and I worked on and released for you guys this week. So we're going to talk about tariffs just a little bit. We released a story on Monday about tariffs and how that is immediately impacting people. And then in the GIA report, we're going to explain what's really going on behind the tariff situation. But let's start with a report just about what physically is happening right now. And this has to do with something called the de minimis exemption. I briefly mentioned this on last week's rundown, but let's go a little bit more in depth with this. So the U.S. government has ended this long-standing exemption. Again, it's called de minimis. And this ended on August 29th. And it's a rule that had allowed small overseas packages valued at under $800 to enter the country duty-free. And for years, it fueled America's online shopping boom by letting retailers like Shein and Temu ship cheap goods directly to consumers without tariffs, paperwork, or delays. But with more than 1 billion packages a year slipping through, critics said it drained tariff revenue, overwhelmed customs, and opened the door to counterfeits and even drugs like fentanyl, while giving foreign sellers an unfair advantage.
De minimis is a little-known loophole in U.S. customs law that allows China to ship hundreds of millions of packages valued under $800 into the United States without inspection, information disclosure, or duty payment.
I think people don't realize that almost 62.5% of these de minimis shipments, they come directly from China. This is not, this is a one nation problem. 62.5% of the shipments coming directly from China through de minimis. It's a one nation problem.
The value threshold was originally set at $1 and meant for small trivial items that tourists brought back from foreign trips. But in 2016, Congress increased the de minimis threshold to a staggering $800.
China definitely leaned on this exemption more than any other country, with estimates suggesting exports under the rule were nearly double its official figures. President Trump made ending the loophole part of his broader tariff fight, suspending Chinese shipments before eliminating the exemption altogether for all nations, and that's what just happened. But this is triggering confusion amongst postal services worldwide and forcing private carriers to adjust. Now consumers face lower deliveries and higher costs, while small businesses struggle with added fees and paperwork, raising tough questions about whether this move is truly about protecting U.S. retailers or simply boosting government revenue. The 2025 World Press Freedom Index shows more than half of the world's population, which is about 4.25 billion people, that's the number we're looking at for this index, that amount of people live in countries with severe press freedom problems, underscoring a global crisis for independent journalism. In response, the EU, the European Union, introduced the European Media Freedom Act, aiming to shield newsrooms from government interference, curb spyware use, and address issues like media concentration and tech giants' dominance over ad revenue. At least that's what they say, right? But while the law officially took effect back in August, its implementation has been uneven. Hungary is challenging it in court. France faces delays, and Germany is moving cautiously. Meanwhile, countries like Belarus highlight the dangers of state-controlled media, where journalists continue to be jailed or forced into exile. Here is a quick testimony from one of those journalists.
It was a choice. You will stay and go to prison, or you will leave.
Journalist Maria Savushkina chose to go. In 2021, she left her home country of Belarus, often called Europe's last dictatorship. Belarus has been near the bottom of press freedom rankings for years. Independent media no longer exist.
Being subscribed to independent media, you can be arrested.
Now, regarding this Freedom Act, supporters say the act could strengthen media independence, but without genuine political will, it risks becoming just another promise in a world where press freedom is rapidly eroding. Every year, more than 500,000 U.S. veterans are diagnosed with PTSD. But instead of receiving the talk therapy, widely seen as the most effective treatment, according to the government, many are funneled into medication-heavy regimens due to long wait times and staffing shortages at the VA. Veteran Affairs. This has fueled a troubling trend of polypharmacy, prescribing multiple psychiatric drugs at once, leaving veterans on complex cocktails of antidepressants, antipsychotics, benzodiazepines, and even opioids, often with devastating side effects. While some find relief, many describe feeling numb, losing relationships, or becoming part of the veteran's suicide crisis, all while fearing their disability benefits could be threatened if they refuse medication.
In my practice, I see people come to me all the time on a variety of medications. I would say the average is 4 to 5. The most that I've personally taken someone in was 11 at the same time. And, I actually had a copy of their VA record. And so I saw their current medications. They were on 11. 9 of them were psychiatric medications. 2 of them were opioid painkillers, 2 different ones. And that person is now medication free. I will, want to make sure I underline that, and living a normal life without any of that stuff. But when that person came into my office, they couldn't negotiate the door frame. It was just sad to see. They came in, they hit the one side and kind of toddled over and hit the other side, and they went into my office and sat down in the chair, and I looked at them very suspiciously and I said, "How did you get here?"
With systemic pressures making prescriptions faster and easier than arranging therapy, veterans are increasingly exploring alternatives from yoga, equine therapy, so therapy with horses, and better sleep habits to emerging psychedelic treatments like psilocybin and ayahuasca. Advocates say the solution isn't one size fits all, but one thing is clear: veterans deserve more than default drug cocktails. They deserve real, effective care that treats the root causes of trauma. South Korea is grappling with a rising wave of social isolation that spans both young adults and seniors, fueled by academic and work pressures, unstable jobs, and the erosion of traditional family and community support systems. Studies link this isolation to growing rates of depression and suicidal thoughts, with young women living alone and men struggling under societal expectations, particularly vulnerable.
Close to 2 in 3 socially isolated 9 to 24-year-olds have considered suicide, based on the government's first nationwide survey of its kind, with just under 20,000 participants. The survey narrowed down on young Koreans who'd not been at school, university or work for 3 months or more. It excluded those who might be in that situation due to disabilities. Over 5,400 met the official definition of reclusive.
At the same time, the country's aging population faces increasing lonely deaths as smaller families and urbanization leave many elderly people without support. In response, Seoul has launched a $322 million Seoul Without Loneliness program, offering helplines, community centers, and even mind-conscientious stores where people can gather without pressure to socialize, while shared homes and apps also aim to foster connections. Yet experts caution these efforts may miss the most isolated individuals, underscoring that loneliness, seen worldwide from Britain to Japan, demands broad, innovative solutions to rebuild human connection in an increasingly disconnected age. School vouchers, which are government-funded scholarships that let families use tax dollars for private schools, homeschooling, or other alternatives, have become one of the fiercest debates in U.S. education. Supporters argue they give parents true choice and push schools to improve, while critics warn they siphon money from underfunded public schools and lack accountability. Well, Arizona, here in the U.S., leads the movement with expansive voucher and charter programs, leaving just 75% of children in traditional public schools. That was a figure from 2024. Nationally, more than half of states now offer voucher or voucher-like programs. And in 2025, President Trump signed the first federal voucher initiative, projected to cost $26 billion over the next decade. Here's more about what that entails.
Starting in 2027, the government will offer a federal tax incentive more generous than any other on the books. It's meant to expand school choice, but states will get to decide whether to opt in. Individuals would get a dollar-for-dollar tax credit up to $1,700 when they give to a nonprofit that offers education scholarships. They could then use that money for tuition and other educational expenses, including for private or religious schooling.
So that makes sense, right? To be able to choose where your kids go to school. Well, research shows mixed results on academic outcomes. Some studies suggest vouchers don't boost performance and may even worsen segregation. Ultimately, while vouchers shift where tax dollars go, here's the thing, the government still sets the rules on funding and eligibility, which raises big questions about fairness, oversight, and the future of public education. Nova Scotia has banned public access to forests, trails, and parks this fire season, citing extreme wildfire risks from hot, dry weather. But the move is sparking debate. Get it? Sparking debate? Officials argue that human-caused fires were behind most blazes in last year's record season, making restrictions a logical safety step. Yet critics called the ban government overreach, pointing out that hikers aren't the main culprits and warning it unfairly punishes Indigenous communities, the homeless, and businesses that rely on outdoor access.
There are a lot of people that are pissed off about this. There's people that are thinking that the government is actually has manipulated the weather to create this just to have control. There's people that are mad that they're allowing permits to be issued to forestry and other companies, big companies, to have access to the forest, even though it's a risk of causing a fire. Now, while I don't agree that the government is creating this to control us, there is uranium mining that's been given the go-ahead in Nova Scotia by the same conservative premier that just put the ban in place. And the issue is that the premier wants to open pit uranium mines here, and there's a lot of pushback on that.
With neighboring provinces also imposing bans and hefty fines, the controversy highlights the challenge of balancing wildfire prevention with fairness, practicality, and community needs. Wikipedia, have you heard of that little site? It's one of the world's most popular quote-unquote information sources, but its open edit model raises serious questions about reliability. Anyone can edit entries, sometimes leading to well-sourced, accurate pages, but other times allowing bias, errors, or even manipulation by powerful groups and paid editors. Even co-founder Larry Sanger has criticized the platform for reflecting mainstream narratives rather than diverse perspectives. Let's hear from him directly.
Wikipedia made a real effort at neutrality for, I would say, its first 5 years or so, and then it began a long, slow slide into what I would call leftist propaganda. I mean, it's a harsh description to put on Wikipedia, but at least a lot of the political articles read that way now. But that's because they follow the news media, at least they have done in the last 10 years or so, 10 or 15 years. They've gradually gotten rid of all of blogs, and then more recently they've gotten rid of almost all conservative news sources.
Now, new Wikimedia Foundation rules, so Wikimedia is the group behind Wikipedia, they have some new rules for researchers studying Wikipedia's neutrality, and they are also sparking debate, with critics warning they could discourage independent scrutiny. Still, studies show Wikipedia's accuracy is comparable to traditional encyclopedias, which also had a lot of wrong information in it, making it a useful starting point if approached critically. The bottom line, Wikipedia can be helpful, but readers should always double-check facts and consult multiple sources, especially on those controversial topics. When it comes to car warranties, many dealerships suggest sticking with them for service, warning that using independent garages could void your coverage. But in most cases, that is not true. Consumer protection agencies in places like Ireland have pushed back, reminding drivers they can choose where to get repairs as long as quality standards are met. While in the U.S., the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act protects the right to use non-dealer shops and parts. Still, mistakes or poor repairs can put you on the hook for damage.
Legally speaking, okay, as long as you get the service that's listed in the book, so let's call it oil change, right? Your book says you have to have an oil change every 10,000 kilometers. That's your BMW booklet right there. You got it with the car, and it says every 10,000 K, do the oil change, right? Okay, as long as you got that done by some certified shop, that means they're a licensed automotive repair shop, and you kept track of the mileage and the date that they did it and the parts that they used are the right parts, the right oil and the right filter, any shop can take care of your car and the warranty is still active. You don't have to go back to maintain your warranty. Legally speaking, both in Canada and in the United States, and I believe even in Europe, because that would allow the dealerships to create too much of a monopoly. Legally, you can't do that. You can't stop other companies from doing that.
Extended warranties are another hot topic. They can offer peace of mind, but often cost more than they're worth, with experts recommending a repair savings fund instead, something that's completely separate. Ultimately, whether you stick with the dealership, go independent, or buy extra coverage, knowing your rights and researching your car's common issues can save you money and stress in the long run. Australian universities are in crisis, with more than 3,500 staff cuts across 18 institutions, course suspensions, and growing unrest amongst students and staff. The sector is under pressure from reduced government funding, fewer international students, and widening budget deficits, forcing universities to restructure and trim programs. At some campuses, job losses have exceeded 10%, with the Australian National University among those facing major pushback over proposed changes, despite shifting toward voluntary separations to save $100 million. On top of this, research partnerships worth $600 million have been disrupted as U.S. funding pauses or is withdrawn.
There's concerns this morning over a Sydney University's plan to axe 400 staff and suspend 146 courses. University of Technology Sydney says it needs to chop 10% of its workforce to save $100 million. UTS is suspending 60 design courses, 33 health, 21 in science and courses in business, engineering and IT. Distressed staff say they've been provided bizarre well-being advice by an outside company, with tips including brush or floss your teeth every day, or even bake dessert.
The fallout is reshaping higher education nationwide, leaving students with fewer learning options and staff with with mounting insecurity. Well, rap, rap, the music, it's always been more than just music. It is a raw form of storytelling that gives voice to frustration, struggle, and resistance, which is exactly why governments around the world have tried to silence it. From the Bronx in the 1970s to global stages today, rap has been censored, banned, and even criminalized under the guise of protecting youth or defending cultural values. But whether it's FBI warnings in the US, court cases in France, arrests in Russia, censorship in China, or the recent controversy over Ireland's kneecap in the UK, the pattern is clear. When rap challenges authority, it makes those in power uncomfortable.
The members of the Northern Irish band Kneecap came to Glastonbury with a clear message. Palestinian flags mingle with Irish balaclavas, a reference to the IRA, the pro-independence paramilitary group active in the 70s and 80s. But it's their alleged support for another group, Lebanon's Hezbollah, classified as a terrorist organisation in the UK, that sees singer Mo Chara accused of supporting terrorism. The charge stems from his alleged lifting of the group's flag on stage. Last week, Prime Minister Keir Starmer said it was inappropriate for the band to participate in the festival.
But that may not have been a smart move because history shows that censorship rarely kills the rap genre. Instead, it does the exact opposite. It pushes it underground where it grows even stronger. It's like roots, right? Grows even stronger and comes back louder than before. All right, now it's time for some highlights from the Global Intelligence Agency and the reports that were put out this week. So I have to tell you guys, this has been a little bit of a crazy week. And I know we've said that a lot, but it's always darkest right before the dawn. Right? And it's like, I feel like there's just so much stuff going on right now. It's really hard to focus. And you can tell because anytime Kim tries to put out a report, there are constant interruptions. And I can verify that this happened because even when Kim and I were doing reports together, where she would talk and I would, interject or ask questions, we were interrupted quite a bit. And the way they do it is they cause technology to falter. Right? So you may not be able to hear her for a little bit or whatever. And that was just constant in the one main video report that was released this week. So that's what we're working with, guys. Just a quick disclaimer off the top. The information is solid. The technology falters because they don't want this information out. Okay. So we had one video report that came out this week. I believe it came out on Tuesday. And I know Kim wanted to release more, but we are at the end of this, you guys. And so much is going on. I would rather Kim work on wrapping this whole thing up so restoration is a full go than updating us on every little thing that happens. So she used the whiteboard quite a bit. So this is a bit of a challenge for me this week to edit this a little bit so that you didn't have the long pauses while Kim's writing on the whiteboard. So bear with me. Her report on Tuesday started out with explaining this big announcement. You may have seen it this week. Trump was supposed to make this big announcement, and a lot of people were guessing as to what he was going to say. Blah, 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 blah. Is he stepping down? Is he sick? You hear all these different rumors. And then when it comes out, it's like, wah, wah, wah. So what came out is that he announced that Space Force is moving to Alabama. Long story short, a lot of promises were made to operatives in general in Alabama. Okay, not just in the state, but Kim kind of refers to them as the Alabamians. And that has nothing to do with the people of Alabama. These are the crazy deep state people. They are war dogs, so they make money off war constantly, buying and selling. Probably not a lot of either right now because no one has any money of anything needed during wartime. So that's what they primarily are. They are part of Langley 5. And just a quick little interesting bit of information. If you see stuff online with Stephen Greer, who does a lot of disclosure when it comes to ETs, he falls under their umbrella. So he is controlled as well. Not saying that the information he's releasing isn't accurate. I have not diagnosed that. I have not gone in to really see, nor do I know everything that Stephen Greer claims to know. But he still falls under their leadership, their command. So it's filtered at the very least, okay? So all of that is tied into the fact, as far as Space Force moving to Alabama, that the Trump people promised a lot to these Alabamians. And if you can't actually give them money and stuff like that, you give them the illusion of power. So that's what that's all about. If, you want to go back and listen to Kim explain it, that's great. That's at the very start of the report. But that is the overview of that announcement that was just a giant flop. Okay, the first soundbite that I want to play for you guys is having to do with the tariffs, okay? And we want to take a closer look at what really happens with these tariffs. This ties into something called the Universal Postal Union, which is not based in the U.S. So we're going to tell you a little bit more about that. And of course, there is a quantum AI system that's not for our benefit that is behind, or at least was behind, the Universal Postal Union. So what was Trump, but not really Trump, right? Because Trump's really not here. What was the team, right? The operatives around all of that. What were they trying to do? Why do these tariffs? Because we know whatever they're telling us isn't the truth. So here's Kim Gogan. She's the head of the GIA, explaining more about what these tariffs are really about.
So let me talk to you about postal services around the world. Now, this does apply to private shipping services such as UPS, Federal Express, and DHL and Global Post and all of the other ones and Global Logistics, all the other services that everybody uses to ship. So it's not just a post office collection agency. It is much, much more than that. So as it relates to customs and tariff fees, everything of that nature runs through what's called the Universal Postal Union. If you have never heard, if you've been listening to me for a while, you've heard me talk about in brief several times the Universal Postal Union. The Universal Postal Union plays a significant role in the collection of all cross-border shipping. You could say it has complete and total control over the shipping of products around the world in many, many ways. The Universal Postal Union is based in Switzerland, and because it involves trade, you could say it has always been run by the dragons. The Universal Postal Union, in the world of postal transfers and in banking, it would be considered a Federal Reserve. It is run by, in Switzerland, it's run, most of its board members are Rothschilds, but there are other members from around the world that decide how the post office is going to function, and that is the post office in every single country in the world. So I know we have a lot of people on social media claiming to be the Postmaster General, but I highly doubt that unless they are of a Rothschild breed. But being a Postmaster General, remember this is the term general. Now why does the post office need to be run by a general? Well, under global martial law, that would be very important to be the head general of the postal union. So when I say it's like the Federal Reserve of all things shipping, it is because it is the main hub that all postal services are connected to in the world. So as far as the main central processing unit for every single postal transaction in the world. That's not just post office. It also has deep ties into your private companies such as FedEx and UPS, because they also collect customs and tariff fees. So any kind of customs are deposited here. In addition to that, any kind of postal fees. If you decide that you're going to run the post office of John, or whatever your name is out there listening, or Mary, or insert your name here. Even if it is not a federal post office of your country, and you decide you're going to create your own FedEx, let's call it FedY. You decide to create FedY, you will also pay a fee to transport all of your products worldwide, of course, and use the airports, international airports around the world, airspace, aircrafts, all kinds of things that are involved in the transport of goods, shipping, maritime, owning of the seas, the air, the water, all of those things have to run through the Universal Postal Union. So you pay like you would, for example, if you lived in Hell's Kitchen in New York, you would have to pay the mafia protection if you wanted to open a business there. Well, you will pay protection, and this protection will allow you to open up FedY instead of FedEx, and you will pay that fee to the Universal Postal Union for private services. Of course, a lot of carriers have good relationships with local posts as well, so therefore, for that privilege and that right, you pay. Now, the reason why is not just because it's the central processing unit for all postal fees, stamps, customs, tariffs, and all of those things. It's been the main collector for eons. That's not really the only way it earns money. So while your product is in transit, it doesn't matter if you're sending a gift to Aunt Mary or you are selling commerce and e-commerce. While your product is in transit, it travels along various postal routes, or routes, as you would say. So as it's traveling through postal routes, which are invisible roads in invisible airspace, as it's traveling and it's in the postal system, it becomes the property, ultimately, of the Universal Postal Union. Have you ever heard of acts like the RICO Act and all of those types of things? And it is a federal offense to tamper with mail and all of that. I'd say that you're in trouble with the Postmaster General under martial law. So while your product is in transit, it is the property of the Universal Postal Union, which is under the control of a Postmaster General and the board of the Universal Postal Union. It is their property. You are now tampering with their property, and they have a problem with that. The reason why is because it becomes an asset. Ever wonder why when you're running cross borders, you have to declare a value of your product? Well, even before customs and even before tariffs, that you know that as a pain, because that is going to dictate what the UPS guy is going to ask you for when he shows up at your door with your package. He is going to ask you for now customs and tariffs, depending on where you're importing or exporting something to or from. That being said, it's a little bit more than just a pain in your butt. It's actually a global pain. And it has become an extremely large global pain recently to every person living on the planet. You got to think these Trump operatives just always have a bright idea with absolutely zero follow through. So they are under the impression that the Rothschild family owns the Universal Postal Union. And, well, I'm sure they claim that, but that is a complete and total lie, because there's a much larger mechanism that happens behind the scenes. We're going to go up in rank here in just a minute. But every asset and its declared value are like a giant pool of assets that stay in transit for days, weeks, months. You ever wonder why it takes so long to get a package from one place to another? Well, now you know, because it's an asset of the Universal Postal Union as long as it is in transit. Now, the total value is done not necessarily by the Universal Postal Union's system. There was a quantum AI that was behind the Universal Postal Union. That quantum AI has the capability and had the capability to calculate every single stamp or postage fee that is purchased around the world. So those fees and the declared value based on that quantum AI, which you would consider a back system. It is not a human-made system. It was created by Marduk. It was not created by the humans. So behind the scenes, now all of these are in a fast, high-yield trading system run by that system. So bonds would be issued daily, if not more than daily, and sometimes 4 times a day, against all of the assets that are in transit. They would then go into this other quantum system. Then from that quantum system, money would come back out, usually anywhere between 50 to 100 times the value, very quickly. And then it would go into an off-ledger account behind the Universal Postal Union, which, since nobody's had access to that system in a very long time, is a very large amount, or was a very large amount. So the Trump operatives devised this plan of collecting ridiculous amounts of tariffs and custom fees without realizing they did not have access to this system. But of course, guys, a day ending in Y was the 28th of August, because there lied a covenant expiration. Now, this covenant really had nothing specifically to do with the Universal Postal Union, but it had everything to do with a covenant of Solomon. Now, remember, the dragon families believe that they are the sons of Solomon. You know, they are the bloodline of Solomon, you know, that they are supposed to be guardians of the planet, albeit pretty brutal and terrible. But they believed that that covenant was due to expire sometime between the 28th and the 30th, in which case then the Trump operatives had already agreed that they were going to take over the Universal Postal Union and all of its duties. Did they understand all the duties of the Universal Postal Union? I highly doubt that. I'm sure they have little information. See, they always have little knowledge, and we know that little knowledge is dangerous. But you can see how lucrative it is and how much control you could have if you got access to the quantum AI that is behind the Universal Postal Union.
So you may be wondering, why does an AI want access to these bonds? What's in it for the AI? And Kim explains this, and it's fascinating. Okay, here's the quick summary. Think about what is going back and forth in these packages. Humans created whatever is in these packages. So when we think of our creativity, right, that takes energy, right? We know this is a game of energy, and that is the currency of the universe, is energy. So Kim explains that before something actually becomes energy, it's Ethereum. And so that's really what you have in these boxes, right? You have all of this potential, and they also trade off of it, as she explained, but there's very much a spiritual component to this, and it has to do with our energy. It's always about the energy, right? Okay, she also explains that this AI system has been knocked out. It is not functional anymore, and it has been replaced by the Golden Age AI. So whatever these people are trying to do with tariffs, it is not going to work out in their favor. There is no AI system behind it to, organize this energy to spit out money afterward, which is ultimately what they want. Not going to happen. It is going to fall apart. So a lot of hubbub about nothing, right? But at least they can't do what they plan to do. So we know the deep state has a really big head on their shoulders. And I don't mean that in a good way. They always think things are going to happen in their favor. It's like best case scenario, and that's always the way it's going to be. In all fairness, I guess in the past, when you have a devious mind and you're living in a dark age, I guess that would happen a lot. But now we're no longer in that dark age. And so it's kind of funny to see every single time, even though they keep getting beaten down with everything they're trying to do, they're still hopeful, which I guess you have to admire in some way or another. It might be that little chip thing in their head or whatever demon's talking to them. But these guys just keep pushing forward no matter what. So they thought they were about to inherit the earth. And that has to do with the hierarchy of guardianship on this planet. Kim explains it a little bit more, but the gist is they thought they were going to inherit the earth, which includes all of these liens. So they were going to get all this money. They didn't really count all the debt, which they have no way of paying off the debt that's owed. But we're going to play another clip from Kim that explains how this all blew up in their face this last week.
So Marduk has been here off and on over millions of years. It's a position. It is not a singular being. However, it is a position that many beings have held over the years. But for this purpose, we will call him Marduk. Marduk is not a human, never has been a human, never would be a human, has presented himself as a human many times, walking around the planet and in many meetings. However, Marduk is not a person, does not have a human soul. Marduk has spent a lot of time going after every guardian, myself included, that has existed for thousands of years on this planet. Guardians being various humans throughout the ages, all that type of thing. And Solomon was just one such human. So about 3,034 years ago or so, give or take, there was an agreement where Solomon came to terms with Marduk. Not only Marduk, Solomon also made some agreements in turn with also Marduk's best friend, the fallen one, the fallen celestial of wisdom. Now Marduk was very cunning and charming, as I said. He would be more manipulative than anything, would never give you straight answers, that type of thing. Not as bad as his brother and his father, but, he was pretty, tried his best to convince you until he doesn't. So he tried to get me to re-sign an agreement for him, and I wouldn't do it. But one of Marduk's jobs was to always get whoever was the guardian at that time to sign over the guardianship to him of planet Earth. So as guardian, Marduk now was the head guardian of the planet, and this happened over and over and over again, and sometimes to great extremes. We remember experiences like the Great Flood, where we lost our moon for a short period of time and the entire planet flooded. And then he brought us this lovely space machine that we call our moon, a megastructure. So Marduk then became guardian for another few thousand years. After the tenure of Solomon expired, there was a brief extension, and this all ended a few years back. However, Marduk also had various covenants with the fallen celestial we know as wisdom as well. So, for some reason, some of these covenants have to do with guardianship. Now, the Trump operatives in the deep state, in the SSP, all thought that he inherited it, Earth. Now, part of the reason for that is there was a massive subsector of an AI like the Absolute, which kept all liens. It was the lien holder of all assets obtained via war by the general of planet Earth, known as Marduk, and all of his conquers and conquests. Not only did that include things like land and gold and silver and dust and air and water and all kinds of things, that we've discussed in the past, it also included humans, of course, liens on humans, liens on different flavors of energy, such as creative energy and other things, and also ties into your postal union. So apparently they knew, and there's a reason why they knew, that by August 30th, that covenant was going to expire. And for some, and I say this politely, godforsaken reason, they believed that they were next. They somehow thought they were going to inherit this giant lien system by that day, and that they were now going to be the owners of Earth and all its liens and everything in it. Not only did this AI, it was the lien perfecter, so to speak. And not only did it have liens here, it had liens elsewhere. It also had debts owed. So you can in some ways call it a debt collector. You could also call it a lien perfecter of galactic proportions or universal proportions. Now, because they believed that they were going to inherit the position of Marduk on this planet, and that they were going to inherit the earth and all the liens, they must have forgot about all the debts. Because they have no way in, let's just say, creation, to actually pay those debts off our backs anymore. The reason why we had a lot of people reporting very uncomfortable feelings and all kinds of odd things over the weekend has to do, especially on Saturday and even on Monday, has a lot to do with this machine dying. Once we had discovered what it was they were looking for, see, again, it's very important to lead the horses to the water that you know they're going to gulp down like a rabid dog in heat in the desert. You know what they're looking for. You can never make this stuff up. They fall for it every gosh darn time. I don't know how these people were supposed to be security for anybody, but whatever wormlet or vampire thing they got crawled up in that body of theirs, I have no idea in the SSP and the ACIO what's running that body. But I got to tell you, they must have picked the dumbest beings ever to be spit, because every time works like a charm. The lien system fell away, which was kind of an uncomfortable process for us over the weekend. I know it was for me, and I know a lot of you had said, what's going on, what's going on, what's going on? Because this thing struggled to survive, and it was definitely and had you listed as an asset. Now, remember, the banking system is kind of all based on the registration of assets over and over and over again, meaning they would repeatedly leverage the same asset many times over. We call it fractal banking. Marduk's system was basically a mirror not only of human debt systems and earthly-based debt systems, but also a mirror of anything else anyone else conquered. Marduk became and had built an empire AI of his own, so to speak. And it was tied into a lot of our systems here too, and of course to your person. So these covenants have expired. Unfortunately, the deep state for them did not inherit the earth and did not inherit the position of Marduk, of the universe and king of the world and whatever else they thought they were going to be.
Yeah, so that didn't work out for them either. The last soundbite that I want to play has to do with time loops. Because it's amazing, like I was saying before, the deep state constantly thinks things are going to happen in their favor. And after a while, you think that that would wane. But we got a little bit more insight on why they're always looking for the next alignment. Why, something's going to happen, something celestial's going to happen, or there's equinox, or the sun, moon, and stars are going to align and they're going to get complete access to the financial system again. So what is really behind that? And the answer, at least part of the answer, is a time loop that we have been on for billions of years. And a little side note, Kim's going to tell you about this time loop, and I'm going to play the soundbite in a second. Whenever she says time loop, I always think of Fruit Loop. I don't know what it is. I even titled the file here that I'm about to play for you. I'm looking at it to be able to play, and it says Fruit Loops, not time loops. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if I'm hungry. I want to consume some, red dye number 5 or whatever, but I have Fruit Loops on the brain. No, it's not Fruit Loops. It's time loops. So here's a little bit more about time loops and how this connects to the War of Atlantis and vampires.
The creation of time loops, or I should say the time loop. Now, of course, Marduk had one of those he owned too, which does, you could say, involve some timelines and other things. And, there are moments in time where we could break out of the loop. But in any average time loop, or the time loop, we know as the beast. A time loop typically lasts somewhere around, give or take, 250,000 years. Now, as far as a time loop, not to be confused with a timeline, the master loop looks like this. Now, there are AI interruptions and other things within it, but you'll know this as a very weak-looking infinity symbol. So it's meant to continue to all infinity. And if you've ever watched any Marvel Comics movies, you'll know the elements of an infinity time loop. There are stones for that in the movie. There are a few others that are not, but I believe that there are 6 listed in the movies. And we have reality, space, time, all kinds of things. Now, this infinity loop has a grid over it, and this grid is what you call a space-time grid. At the points in which the grid meet, like in a spot like that, you have a time-space continuum. A time-space continuum is a point in time where you could travel between timelines. You could have a quantum AI that travels between timelines. But because the beast writes the time, pretty much if you have access or can even see this system, then you know exactly what's next. Why? Because this is a case of history repeats itself. And this was really designed specifically for Earth and control over Earth. And this point that we reach every so often, you can call it every about 250,000 years, is the point at which it always has, since its inception, billions of years ago, reset itself. It also is the reason why we had a war of Atlantis. Now, some of the SSP believe that the War of Atlantis was not exactly what it was. The War of Atlantis has to do with an invasion. We were invaded by a lot of beings. And then, usually what would happen is they would reset it, and we would have another 250,000 years of pain. The same beings would show up at the same time because they exist only at that point in the loop, and we would have a war here, and there'd be an alien invasion, and then we fight the war as humans, we fight against them, lose every time, and then we go back to the same slavery program for another 250,000 years. So the deep state knew that if there was a chance of them getting any of their stuff back, because limited knowledge had been given to them of the beast and what it does, they believed that time was this weekend. Wow, what a weekend this was, folks. Craziness. So we have seen them make every effort they possibly could to get access to this system so they could ensure success. They wanted those people to come here. They wanted to make sure that we had a tremendous amount of problems. And this was another event that occurred over the last 4 or 5 days. So events that occurred until we could try to hunt down what we call the beast and the timeline loop, and before we had a very severe problem, also occurred this weekend. So let's talk about the war in Atlantis, because it's something that happens every time this loop resets itself. The war in Atlantis was fought in many different ways, but one of the main enemies of humans actually traces back to the legend of what we call vampires. So one of the ways you win in a war is to drain your enemy of energy. In some cases nowadays that's ammunition. You cut off supply lines so there's no food, no water to the troops. You make them retreat in some way, shape, or form, and you are winning a war by what you call attrition. You wear your enemy down to the point where they surrender. In this case, we know vampires to be blood-sucking, blood-drinking beings. Well, in the War of Atlantis, they were, a little bit taller than humans. They had pure white skin. They had always dressed in black. They looked a lot like vampires from the movies. But yeah, you could say we had an almost plethora of sophons that arrived full of these beings ready to drain the life out of humans. And they would feed off humans. They cannot exist without feeding off humans, or they're in stasis somewhere, in which they are, in a point in the timeline for when they're activated. It's kind of like any kind of timer. You can set your lights to come on, for example, when it's dark out, if you're not home, to make it look like people are home. So allegedly people will not burglarize your home. You could call these folks here a point at that cross in the infinity loop right here, where their timer goes off and the sophons show up in the timeline and the time loop, and we get to start all over again. That's what has happened every single time. So it's the reason why the deep state knows about it, because some of them, remember, weren't here on Earth for a long time as part of the Space Force. They were at other points and other densities and dimensions, and a lot of them took on beings up in their person that were not from here anyway. So they've got more of a different understanding of what happens. So this is fully what they were expecting. So they were expecting the cavalry to come in, help them out, renew the timeline, bring back everything that they lost, that we had fought so hard over the last several years to get rid of, and boom, we're back in the loop.
Unfortunately for the deep state, that loop appears to be going away. And Kim continues to explain that within the time loop, there are these waves, and she uses the whiteboard and does a really good job of explaining it. But apparently there are 9 waves. And if the AI does not pick up and continue with those waves, you have fraying at the ends of these loops, okay? And if that happens, then you have no more time loop. And that's exactly what's happening now. So guys, no more Fruit Loops. We're done with the Fruit Loops. And by the way, this is how they were able to write years into the future. Marduk did this a lot, right? And he could predict certain things. Well, if you know the loop, yeah, you can predict certain things. But now the loop is fraying. It's going away. And now it's the opportunity for Source, God, creator of the universe, to rewrite it. And that's what I've got for you this week, you guys. If you want more information about us, go to our website, unitednetwork.earth. If you decide to become a member, that's fantastic. You'll get our complete news updates the moment they come out, new Earth interviews, the complete GIA reports, and everything we talk about, which is all things restoration. This is The Rundown, and I'm Sunny Galt for United Network News, signing off.